Welcome to the Two Moms Zero Attention Span podcast. Today we are talking about internet safety. I'm Jess.
I'm Allison.
All right, so let's jump right into it. So I actually haven't had to navigate this as much with my own kids, but you have teens. So I feel like this is really, really exciting for a lot of people doing gentle, respectful parenting, because a lot of the content that you see is geared very much toward toddlers, infants, and people don't, because a lot of people with teens, we weren't talking about gentle or respectful
Right,
parenting.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I think, and I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. This was new for me, and I was the only one parenting this way out of my entire family, my entire friend group. It was a lonely time, but I think the girls got cell phones, I want to say 8-ish. I mean, like older phones, but just for safety things at school or whatever the case may be. But they were monitored. They did not have them at night. Like they think they turned them in at 8 or something on school night, something like that. And they were monitored, and we would look through the phones, and stuff like that together. And we started having the discussions on what grooming sounds like, why some compliments may feel good, but why they're not okay, the age group that should be talking to them, and not all at once. It was a progression, right? So we would talk about these things slowly. We would talk about our feelings. If someone says something to you and it gives you that icky, yucky feeling, what does that mean? And how do you handle that? So they had ages 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 6 years before they had their phones 24/7. And I have never checked them since, not one time. But I was confident that, because I guess when they were around 11-ish, there was, for some reason, a lot of predators on the internet right then, like right before they had their phones full time. I don't know what it was, coincidental, but they were coming to me and we were having great discussions about it. And I think another thing that we learned is when we had those discussions, I never wanted them to feel shame in coming to me. I wanted them to know that they didn't do anything wrong. It's not their fault. And that we would discuss it and work it out and what to do in those situations. But around 11-ish, I remember a lot of those scenarios happening. Mom, someone said this, or someone sent me this picture. And as a mother, my first instinct was, I'm going to do something to that person, because you get so upset, but I couldn't react that way. I had to say, you know what, there's a lot of sick people. I am so proud of you for coming and talking to me about it. How did it make you feel? And then talk about the feelings that were associated with it. But that was kind of the basis of how it started. Phones at 8, the discussions on grooming, coercion, red flags, all of those things, what's appropriate, what's not, the age group you should be talking to. It's a lot of information, but we had 5 or 6 years to get it all in before they had their phones permanently.
Yeah, and I think one thing that people think is like, oh, it could never be my kids. They don't have access to this or access to that, or, they don't have their own phones, or they don't have this. But kids today, they are on the internet and in some way engrossed in social media, or, whether it be at school and they're using their friends' phones, or whether, and I think a lot of times when people are very reactive or very restrictive, and they think, okay, my kid's definitely not doing this. Sometimes it's not that they're not doing it, it's that they're very good at hiding it from you.
Absolutely.
Or they feel that they can't come to you about certain things. It doesn't necessarily keep the kids safer, it keeps them secretive.
I can't, that's such a good point. I can't tell you how many of even my girls' friends were teenagers, 14, 15, would put apps on their phones, and then they're like deleting the apps before I drop them off at home, because their parents didn't allow them to have Snapchat or didn't allow them to have whatever. Where there's a will, there's a way.
That's always been the case for teenagers,
Yeah.
Right? They're not allowed to go to parties, so they sneak out. They're not allowed to do this, so they do it by the gas station before they go to school, or
Right.
that they, whatever it is, like that's always kind of been the case. And I think one thing that that is very worrisome is that, like, the number one way that kids are abducted in the United States by a stranger is the preteen age group being lured away, being contacted by somebody on the internet, maybe somebody that they even think is another teen. And then they're meeting up with them. They're not telling their parents they're meeting up with them. They're not talking to their parents about
Yeah.
what it is that they're going to do because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get, and that's kind of a very scary thought. So I think one of the biggest things that people don't think about when it comes to internet safety is how open is the communication between you and your child, and then what is their sense of self-worth? What is, because if they're seeking validation from strangers on the internet, from maybe
Yes.
other kids on the internet, from wherever it is, because they don't feel it in their own home, they don't
Mhm.
feel, safe, secure, love for who they are. I think those two things are probably the biggest things that go overlooked, because a lot of things that we talk about is, okay, how do we get those apps that monitor the phone? How do we take it and then read through everything, even if it's been deleted? And that's a lot of the things that's talked about with internet safety. But I
Yes.
think a lot of it can also come down to the connection and communication and how open it is. And what is your kid's sense of self-worth, and where is their
And
self-esteem?
being and you want to be proactive, and as proactive as you are, there's still going to be instances. But I think another good example is, I always hear about 12, 13-year-old girls getting caught sexting or sending an inappropriate picture or something like that, and the parents are so, I don't want to say overreactive because it's a huge deal. But they're so upset, and they come down hard and they call her names or they punish her and take her phone. When to me, it's a cry for help. Like, when you're 12 or 13, if you were sending pictures like that, there's a much larger issue going on, usually self-esteem or a trauma or something like that. And when you just shame, that behavior is not going to stop. You can take that phone, she'll have a burner phone, she'll have a friend's phone. We have to get to that core reason why those things are happening.
And also, where did it start? Because a lot of times it's not a kid who just got a phone one day and then they're sending those pictures
Right.
the
They
next
were
day.
talked into it.
Who is it that they're communicating with regularly? How long has it been going on? And a lot of that does come down to how much are our kids sharing with us and how open are they to sharing with us. Um, because I remember, actually, it's funny. So I remember when I was a teen, the internet was around. Like, it was around. It wasn't obviously how it is today, but I had like the AOL chat and the MySpace was out, and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I really did talk to my mom about everything. And there was one time that somebody had told me to like type in boys.com on the computer, which was a porn site. But I didn't
Right,
know that.
right,
I didn't know
right.
that. I was a kid, or preteen teen. I think I was in like 8th or 9th grade, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, and I was like very like and I had the first thing I did was tell my mom. I was like, hey,
Guess
this
what I
came
saw?
up, didn't know what it was. So if we're like browsing that search history or whatever happens,
Right,
yeah, it was me. Not intentional, didn't like, but
right.
just so you know, that happened.
But I
Um,
think that's another good point, is talking about having age appropriate conversations surrounding sex and intimacy and things like that, and what it really is. Because my first introduction to anything sexual, I was at one of my friend's house spending the night, and they had VHS tapes back then, because I'm old. But on the VHS tape, it said, I think it said Dirty Dancing, like the movie Dirty Dancing, but it was not Dirty Dancing. It was, you know, the
mhm.
other dirty deed. So but I had never been, that was my first introduction to anything like that. And what a shock to be the first, because my parents never talked to me about any of those things.
And I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think also a lot of boys talk about this being their first introduction to
Mm-hmm.
sex and anything sexually related, is finding dirty magazines, or
Yeah.
with their friends, like looking up like dirty video. Like, I think
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of boys and men share that experience, with that
Yes.
being like, kind of sneaking like pornographic image, or now it's so
It's
easy.
almost like a rite of passage for boys. Like, in
Right.
society, it's almost like a rite of passage. Oh, have you seen the, Playboy? Have you seen, it's kind of like a rite of passage for them
Right.
in
And I
society.
think that's also why it's so important to have the open communication, is not even just for like the everyday subjects, but also for like the really tough subjects.
Yeah.
Um, so that your kids aren't getting their first impressions about these really important things
Yeah,
for places that are giving them false narratives and giving
absolutely.
them detrimental or damaging material or information. It's really important, even though it is uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable to even think about for parents, so I can understand why why it's avoided, why the conversations are avoided, because and it's so foreign to so many people. Because think about how many girls who are older, right? Or women who are older didn't even know about their periods until they had one.
I
And they're
know.
like, oh my God, I'm dying. I'm
It's,
dying,
yeah, it's, I wasn't educated on any of those things. So, like we had talked about in other discussions, I found everything out from 13 and 14-year-olds
I
because I was never
actually
educated on those things.
I was actually just given a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, which
Mhm.
has like two series. It's for small kids and then slightly older kids. And it's kind of like a blueprint about how to talk to your kids about pornography on the
Mhm.
internet, or, not only pornography, but
Yeah, yeah,
on the internet, because as much as we like to think, oh, it doesn't happen, our kids do stumble upon on YouTube, on wherever, even in advertisements, things
absolutely.
that you don't necessarily want them seeing, because they could be watching a YouTube clip of something innocent, and then the advertisement is for like a rated R movie that
Right.
like
Yeah.
that they happen to show like a very violent scene in the advertisement, or a very this or a very that. Little things like that that you don't even think of
Mhm.
is easier for kids to be exposed to these days. And it
Mhm.
is something, and even with my kids who are little, I think I talked about this before, is like they're even people who take like the Peppa Pig or the Mickey Mouse and they turn it so you think that you're watching Peppa Pig, it's the characters, it's the voices, but they'll have them doing something inappropriate, like, or
Right.
the image is slightly graphic, even though it's a cartoon, even though it's the cartoon voices, it's not the actual show. And
Right.
unless you're, very hyper vigilant, and whenever your kid is watching like in YouTube, and I think this happened on YouTube Kids, that I saw it happen with the Peppa Pig, and I reported the channel and everything. But unless you're hyper vigilant and actually watching it, if you're just listening, it sounds like your kids are watching Peppa Pig or Mickey Mouse,
Yeah.
which is very scary. So it's important to make sure that you are having these conversations with your kids, so that if they see something like that, that hey, this isn't supposed to be on this show, or this isn't, that they can come to you and say something,
Yeah, and that they recognize it, that they
and they
even recognize
recognize
it.
that it's
Yeah.
right, that it's, something that they're not supposed to be seeing, which is actually how I even found out about that was happening on, it was a YouTube Kids, and it was a Peppa Pig, and it was supposed to be Peppa Pig, and it sounded like Peppa Pig. I was in the same room as my kids,
Right.
and he was like, my son was like, called it, he was like, why is this bloody Peppa Pig? And I looked, and it was like the characters were like getting hurt doing stuff, and there was like one where like, and it wasn't necessarily like super graphic, it's a
Mhm.
cartoon, but
Right.
it's imaging that like I don't want my kids
Right.
seeing. It was violent and, well, like cartoon violent,
Yeah. But I mean,
but
still, it's
enough, but
still, it's
It wasn't Peppa Pig.
right.
It wasn't what I thought my kids were watching.
Yeah.
But then we have a conversation about it, like, "Hey, thanks for telling me. No, this is not what we're supposed to be watching, or we
Yeah.
wanna be watching." And if thank you for saying things, because now we can make sure that we report that channel, because that's a really bad thing that somebody did to
Yeah.
change it
And
and
the
to
fact
change
that
it.
he felt comfortable, talking to you about it, that's always my goal in parenting, is for my kids to feel comfortable talking to me in those moments. And this just popped in my head. It was really funny. I can remember my daughter, it was my youngest daughter, but we were in the car and she had asked me about sex. And I don't remember her exact age. So I explained it to her age appropriately, like the mechanics of sex. And she goes, ew, you have to do that more than once. And she started, she was
That's
like, ew, you know what I mean? It was so funny. She's sitting there like, what's happening?
That's so funny that you say that, because so I was the first person who told my sister what sex was, because I had
Uh-huh.
just learned it. Um for like an age appropriate, I forget when it is that you normally learn about those things, but I think it's like third or fourth grade. Maybe some people think that's really young, but I think like it's somewhere around there,
Yeah, yeah.
like third or fourth grade. And by the way, if you don't tell your kids what it is around that age, one of their friends will. One of
Oh,
their friends will
absolutely.
find out what it is, that what sex is, and then they will feel empowered by that knowledge and make sure that all the
Oh,
other
everybody
kids,
else knows. Yep.
yeah, it's like the first kid that found out that Santa wasn't real.
Yes. Yep.
So I was like, hey, Chrissy, you know what sex is? And I told her, and she got so upset. And I was like, oh no. And then she was like, Mom, you did that? And then she looked around and she was like, twice?
Two whole times.
Yeah, and then you're
Yeah.
kind of you have that conversation with your
Yeah.
kid about age appropriate conversations. It's always about age appropriate
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely. And
Um,
I think taking small, and I think another thing that helps them too is knowing their bodies. Like there's such good opportunities if you're in the bathroom, just asking small questions. I never wanted to just sit down, face my kid and say, here's this is what it is, and never discuss it again. I wanted it to kind of be an ongoing conversation. Mommy helps you take your shirt off for your bath. Who else should be allowed to help you? That's right, your doctor, daddy, or whatever the case may be. But I think those little opportunities of putting that in their head to let them know this is my body. I don't have to give it to anyone. I don't have to show it to anyone if I don't want to. Like those little moments, I really think they add up.
because a lot of people have asked me, when do you start having conversations with your kids about who a safe adult is? How young can you start talking to your kids about how to identify a safe adult and unsafe behaviors? And the truth is you can start planting the seeds for these types of conversations when your kids don't even know what you're talking about yet. One of the easiest ways
Absolutely.
is using anatomically correct body parts. When you
Yes.
use anatomically correct body parts, number one, it shows other people that you and your kid have a conversation about body autonomy, about
Yes.
their bodies, and you have that sort of open communication with them. And
Mhm.
then it also like destigmatizes, so that if anything ever were, God forbid, to happen that was inappropriate or that was uncomfortable, your kids don't feel shame
Yes.
around those
Mhm.
around that, to come and talk to you about it, because you've had conversations. They know what their private parts are, they know the anatomically correct names, they know who is and who isn't supposed to be seeing them, and in what circumstances, because
Yes.
there are very few, right?
Mhm.
um but it also releases the shame and stigma, so that they don't
Yes.
feel like they're saying a dirty word when they.
Because shame is the most dangerous part when these things happen. When a child feels shame, whether it's over an inappropriate conversation or someone trying to do something inappropriate, that's why they keep secrets. Because
Mhm.
they, a lot of times because they feel that shame. And when they don't feel that and they feel open that they can come and talk to us about it and we'll support them, not blame them, they're more prone to come and talk to us about those difficult moments. Yeah.
And I think all of these small conversations that start in childhood just continue and set
Hmm.
the foundation to be able to have the more difficult conversations as our kids get older,
Yes.
or what would have been very difficult conversations if you
Hmm.
hadn't been setting the foundation, building those blocks to be able to just continue with the natural flow of these safety conversations that come
Hmm.
with our kids, and
That's
the
what I
open
was
communication.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It makes it become a natural, it's like a natural progression from who should be helping you take your shirt off when you get your bath, or who should be seeing you like that, to when they're a teenager, creating boundaries before dating, individual boundaries for emotional and physical safety, or whatever it is. My kids came and talked to me about that. And that was a big deal because when I went out to date and whatever, I had none of that. It was all sneaky, sneak, sneak.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe those are the two pieces, the two biggest components, the two things that could keep our kids the safest, that we often overlook when we're
Yes.
talking about safety, or when we're talking about internet safety, is where our kids' sense of self-esteem and their ability to openly communicate with us.
Yes.
And I think those two pieces are the largest contributing factor and often overlooked in the conversation usually revolves around something like what apps are you guys using to monitor your kids' phones? And
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the rules, restrictions are usually where the conversation is focused around.
Hmm.
Um, and not that it's not, important to understand and be able to navigate the apps that our kids are using or to
Hmm.
understand and navigate the internet in our own right so that we have, some basis for what our kids are doing and consuming
Yeah.
and understanding.
Hmm.
But when our kids are able to come to us through their entire life about these tough subjects, they're not so tough
You're
anymore.
not playing catch up. You're not constantly, oh, I have to look through their room. I have to look through their phone. I have to do this because they're willingly coming and talking to you in those difficult moments. And I felt like, when I was growing up, my parents were constantly playing catch up with things. You know what I mean? Trying to find or trying to figure out where my kids come and talk to me about it or ask me questions about, things like that.
It's
So,
it's kind of the difference between being proactive and being reactive.
yes. Hmm.
Because if you're starting when they're young and everything's, become normalized to be able to talk about and be able to openly communicate about, there's not this shocking, jarring, like, I don't want to have this. You have
Right.
them, you talk to, I don't want to talk to them about that. You go talk to them,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know. Um, because it's kind of just been a natural flow of communication and conversation around difficult
Yeah,
subjects.
exactly. And I think all the safety, internet safety and dating safety and anything else, it always comes back to that. Do they feel safe coming to us in difficult situations? Or do they feel safe coming and talking to us in scary situations or uncomfortable situations? Or are they going to feel shame and hide it? I mean, it always comes back to that.
And I also think parents with good intentions will be very strict, will be very
Yeah,
harsh. Think if I restrict this so much, if I am strict enough at this, if I, pretend that it doesn't happen other places and it definitely won't happen with my kid,
right.
then it won't. And
Yeah.
and we know that that's not really the way the world works because all these kids have grown up and said, "Oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
did that, but you had no idea." Or like, they're still scared to tell their parents about the things that they did when they were 15 at the age of 30 because
Yes. But it also gives them it also gives them the opportunity to not only grow in their relationship and keep each other safe, but it gives them an opportunity to make better choices in their teen years. And I really think that's why my kids, as of now, it wasn't a tumultuous time like it was for me, because we have that open communication. That's just a natural thing. That doesn't mean they don't make choices I don't care for. It doesn't mean that they don't do things that I, may not be my first choice for them, but overall, it's a completely different experience than what I had.
and the other thing is that if they do make a choice that you don't agree with, if they do something that even they wish they hadn't done,
Right,
make a mistake, they learn something the hard way, are they able to come to you about it? Because
right.
that's something I didn't do a lot of things that people assume that teenagers are doing, but that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that I was perfect or I always made perfect decisions or I didn't
Right.
learn things the hard way. I'm a very impulsive person. I'm a very, and that's always been part of who I am. So there were some mistakes made, and the first person that I was able to go to was my mom. And
So
that's
important.
it's so important because being able to navigate um fixing your mistakes, remedying your mistakes with somebody who has more experience, who can guide you in a productive and healthy way
Hmm.
versus another teenager, God forbid,
Yeah,
is super, super, super important.
it
So that
is.
we're not, taking one small mistake and it's snowballing
And
into
or it wipes away everything else good they've done. The one mistake wipes everything else away, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, because that's another thing. People don't come to their parents about things if they feel like it's gonna be held against them for the next 20 years.
Thrown in their
With every single
face.
thing that they
Yeah.
do, it's gonna be thrown in their face. I never had
Hmm.
that fear. I never had the fear that, okay, this one mistake I made now defines me. And
Hmm. And
and
I almost think it's more, not more important, but I'll say just as important, how we handle those difficult moments than how we praise them for their great grades or their this or their that. It's how we handle the failures that almost make the relationship. You know what I mean? Because it's not in the good times that we learn growth and all that stuff. It's when we're having a difficult moment or they're coming to us with something uncomfortable. It's how we handle that that lets them know hey, if something happens, I can go to her. She kept her word. She didn't take my phone or punish me or yell at me. Like, she sat and talked to me. I really think in those difficult moments, we can learn so much.
I think so too. But just kind of in a nutshell, everything that we talked about, when it comes to internet safety, your child's self-esteem, the open communication, how important that really is with you and how early that starts. And it starts with being able to communicate even from the youngest ages, having those difficult conversations, talking about difficult subjects, um, in very neutral times, so that
Yes.
when they do come up, your kids, there's no stigma around talking about it. The foundation has already been set, and
Hmm.
how much that really helps to protect them on the internet and everywhere in their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a ton of resources now to help that I didn't have when the girls were little, but I have books linked on my TikTok of discussions to have with your younger children on bodily autonomy and keeping themselves safe. There's so many books and resources now to really help that conversation be easier.
Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.